Welcome back to Green is Good, and we're so excited to have with us on the line right now Hans Wegner. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer of the National Geographic Society. Welcome to Green is Good, Hans.
Well, thank you so much, John. And I appreciate you inviting me to be on your show.
Oh, well, Hans, the National Geographic Society has become so enmeshed in our lexicon, in our society as a whole. It's such an important organization doing so much great work and platforming so many great issues. We're so thrilled to have you on today because being the Chief Sustainability Officer of such a wonderful, iconic organization we're so happy to hear your vision of how you're doing work there. But before we get to that, your background is important because there's so many young people, next generation, that want to know, how did Hans Wegner even get there? So can you share with our listeners first, how did you...
Get there to be CSO?
What's your journey? How do you,
Well, it is totally unpredictable. My background is in printing. I apprenticed as a printer, and as a consequence of that, I became very interested in the use of paper.
Okay.
For a portion of my time at the Geographic, I was in charge of all the paper purchasing, and as you might imagine, we use a significant amount of that. And so I became very interested. This goes back to the 1980s, 1990s time frame. I became very interested in best practices in both the management of forests and the manufacturing of wood products, so wood-derived products, and paper in particular, because as I think most people know, paper is a fairly energy-intensive industry and uses some chemicals, particularly that they need to bleach the fibers. So I was very interested to try and make sure that I understood that they were operating not only their forests sustainably and managing them well, but I also wanted to make sure they were compliant with all of their practices having to do with clean water and clean air. And so I routinely went to did site visits with these various paper suppliers of ours to make sure they were being good stewards of not only the forests but also the rivers on which they operated. Gotcha.
So and
that doesn't explain how I became CSO.
Yeah.
I became Chief Sustainability Officer as a consequence of the initiative we started here in 2006.
Oh.
And it really was the question of, the Geographic does such wonderful writing about things going on around us that either excite us or concern us. And in particular, we started doing coverage having to do with climate change in 2004, and all of the things that result from that, whether it's extreme weather patterns, or whether it's attendant deforestation, or whether it's depletion of resources. And so quite a few of us at the Geographic in 2006 felt that it was really important for us to do more, to be a participant in the solution that we also felt we needed to act towards. And in this case, I think we really focused when we organized as a group, and this is all volunteer activity. There were about 15 of us on the staff here who just said, we can do more. And we got together and said, what is the overriding problem that we face? And we all emphatically agreed that climate change was the number one problem we had to deal with, and that climate change effectively trumps all of the other environmental issues that we see. And the potential for disaster that is consequential from climate change, with massive extinctions of both flora and fauna, we felt was unacceptable. So we decided what we should be doing is to identify exactly how much carbon the National Geographic was responsible for having emitted. And that's not only in the operations of our building and the way we do our story compilations and the travel we do, but also in the supply chain that supplies our products to us, whether it's the paper industry, the printing industry, and eventually, of course, the distribution industry, in which case is mostly the postal service. And so we went about doing that. We said, we're going to measure the carbon impact that we're having. We're going to find out specifically what the total greenhouse gas emissions are that the National Geographic is responsible for. And the theory was simply that you can't act until you know. And so we figured we'd measure, we'd find out where we were, and then identify the opportunities that were open to us, both in the way we operate internally and then with the supply chain that helps to provide our products for us.
Well, so you started this in 2006.
Yes.
And for our listeners out there, we're on with the Chief Sustainability Officer of the National Geographic Society, Hans Wegner. And for our listeners that want to follow along here, you got to go to National Geographic's website first, www.nationalgeographic.com. I'm on it right now, Hans, and I'm on the environment section, and it is fascinating. Like you said, you touch in your sector so many issues. I mean, with regards to the environment. So since 2006, all those initiatives you've undertaken, with climate change being the lead, tell our listeners some of the things that you guys have accomplished in these short 7 years.
Well, as far as the climate change piece is concerned, what we've done is we've measured the carbon that we emit here, and most of that is for the when I say here, I mean in the campus on which we operate in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Most of that is electrical, and we basically bought wind power, renewable wind power RECs, against all the energy that we were consuming, not only in this building, our complex of buildings here, but all of the satellite offices where we rent space. So if we have a sales office for advertising in Los Angeles or Chicago, or a business office in New York, we counted that space, we offset it with wind RECs. Further, we offset the natural gas used in the operation of our building here by buying offsets in reforestation projects in Kenya and now in Panama, or alternatively doing methane capture in a landfill. So those are the sort of where I'm now working with our suppliers to identify the things that they can do to take greenhouse gas emissions out of their system.
Right.
So then on the other things we've done a lot of other things, and they range all over the.
Okay.
Let's focus on the cafeteria, for instance.
Sure.
In the cafeteria, we compost everything we can.
Wow.
As a way of reducing landfill waste, and that extends to all the paper products that are used in the whether it's napkins and things like that. And we extended that about 5 years ago to include all the paper towels being used in the building. So everything that's generated in the bathrooms is collected. As far as the paper towels are concerned, that's all composted. So anything that can be is composted.
Wow.
That can't be recycled is composted. We've other things we've done in the cafeteria. We eliminated all plastics, so that instead of using plastic clamshells, we now use ones made from bagasse, which is leftover pulp from sugarcane pressing. We did a calculation that says by the presence of water bottles on campus, we were responsible for about 150 metric tons of carbon emissions. We eliminated those and gave everybody a mug and said, or a bottle, and said, use the water that we have that we can dispense in the buildings, and that's just fine. We test it on a routine basis. We established a farmers market, and the goal here was, which is in our courtyard every Tuesday. The goal is to make the cafeteria operations more local, more organic, and therefore more not only healthier and better food, but also more responsibly grown, and hopefully with a lower carbon emissions footprint. We put a map in the cafeteria which identifies where the location of these farms are within a concentric area of Washington, D.C., so that's within 150 miles. And so we really do focus on having it local, and we are now in the cafeteria up to about 22 to 23% organic and local.
Wow.
We've also, as far as the cafeteria is concerned, eliminated all paper cups effectively, and given every employee a ceramic mug and said, please use that.
Hans, let me pause you for a second. You're doing all these amazing things. And, again, it's so inspirational because this goes to show you how, you were in the printing side of National Geographic, and you become the CSO in just really Basically,
it's the last 5 years. It's a consequence of the initiatives I led with this activity.
Yeah.
And basically, one of the important messages is, people say, well, what can I do? And I said, everybody can get started. And I think the tendency that all of us have, including me, is to wait for somebody else to take the initiative. And I just said, with the threat of climate change, I can't wait for that other person to come around.
Right.
I'm going to do it. And basically what I did is we solicited volunteers, and everything we've done here is done by people who are volunteering time over and above their regular work.
Right.
There is nobody who's doing this full time, who are volunteering their activity, which means, and fortunately, let me back up for this one. One of the things we did the very first thing we did after we organized is we said we really need to get the blessings of senior management. And so we put up a vision statement and a mission and proposed that to our senior management, and they endorsed it. And let me just quickly paraphrase the vision statement, which basically says the National Geographic Society should be a leader in environmentally sustainable practices, doing all it can reasonably to walk the talk.
Okay.
And then the missions portion of that is simply to transform the society into a leader in global conservation, recognized internationally for leadership in environmental sustainability, to lead by example, and coupled with editorial efforts to influence the behavior of individuals and organizations within and beyond the society. And with that endorsement, we then were able to say to the volunteers, saying, look, we have the president's endorsement, and we really try to keep their time away from their jobs to a minimum. We have a steering committee. We meet 1 hour a month, and that's it. I'm very I'm very careful not to exceed people's time requirements because I know they have other jobs.
Sure.
We have 6 subcommittees, and the reason for establishing subcommittees, which are subject-specific, such as the building or the cafeteria and the like, is because, number one, I wanted to get more done more quickly.
Right.
And more maybe as importantly, maybe more importantly, is I wanted to get as many people engaged and involved as wanted to be involved in this process, because I really think this is an organic thing that has to grow from the inside, and it's been very, very productive to me to watch not only the energy on the part of all the volunteers that we have, but also the imagination and the creativity in identifying possible things we can do. And let me just, on that same thread, let me say what I do as far as setting goals is concerned. I ask each of the subcommittees at the end of the year, tell me what your goals are for the next year, and order them, prioritize them by quarter. So that, and so then I take the 6 documents I get from each of these, I sort the goals by quarter, and that becomes my guide. So when we run the steering committee, we'll say, okay, here in the first quarter, we have these goals which we have to achieve, and we try to manage accordingly. And we normally, on an annual basis, set somewhere between 55 and 60 goals. We usually accomplish 45 of those, or there, but it's in the mid-40s. So a substantial number. And they could be really small. They could be as simple as some of the cool things we're doing, for instance, are somebody came to us and said we should plant the butterfly garden in our courtyard because as a way to enable migrating monarchs to have a resting place to restore an energy. So we planted plants that are attractive to and nurture monarch butterflies. We put a beehive on the roof. And last year, for the first harvest, we harvested 4 gallons of honey. I mean, those aren't critically important, but they're symbolic of an attitude and a change in the way we want to operate as a company. One of the things we did that was really seemingly inconsequential, but it's one of those things which, if enough of us do, makes a difference. And that's as simple as we used to have an office supply service that we could call up and say, I need a box of pencils and 3 pads of notebooks. 3 writing pads, and they would be here the next day. We arranged for them to make 1 delivery a week. My goal for next year is to make that 1 delivery every 2 weeks.
Gotcha.
So that it's just a question of planning. Take the truck off the road. Don't be a part of the contribution to either congestion or pollution or the use of fuel.
Hans, we're down to the last minute. This story's amazing. I'm going to want you to come back on and continue it, but it's been a massive success. Share with our listeners. You've got the platform. What you want them to take away from this so you could get them also part of the process and part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Well, I think the number one thing is get started.
Get started.
Everybody, all of us, each of us, at home, in the way we conduct our business and the way we conduct ourselves at work can do it. Every one of us can identify waste of energy. Lights left on, computers left on, things turned on that are not needed right now. Those are savings that go to the bottom line. It's easy to document. We documented that by reducing our energy use reducing our water use, and reducing our natural gas use, we save this company $550,000 a year in those three categories.
Go
Found
green,
money.
save
Bottom
money.
line.
Yeah, Hans Wegner, thank you so much. NationalGeographic.com, you're a leader in environmental sustainability practices and truly living proof that green is good.